Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, better late than never for journalists locked out of Gaza.
We felt we've been lied to by people who accuse us of bending the truth.
Israel, Gaza, and media manipulation.
I think that Israel is one of the most open, free, and democratic countries that there are in the Middle East and among the Western world.
The British Broadcasting Corporation rejects a video appeal for Gaza and takes the flak. And a final, we promise, farewell to President Bush.
So, Mr. President, if you're out there, from all of us in America and all over the world, bye.
Welcome back. For 23 days of conflict, most of the world's media were kept outside Gaza, trying to report a huge story from a distance. Only those journalists already working in what turned into a war zone, like those from Al Jazeera, were able to report from the inside. With access limited by the Israelis, Western news channels like CNN, BBC, Fox, and MSNBC depended on local journalists, Palestinians, to get the news out to them. Our starting point this week, we're going back to Gaza for a postscript on the coverage of the war. We'll look at how Israel managed the story and talk to journalists who covered the fighting in Gaza from both inside and outside the war zone.
For more than 2 weeks, Israel has kept Gaza completely closed to journalists.
With Gaza burning behind me, this is a convenient place to overlook the battlefield. But look where I'm standing. Half a mile outside the Gaza border, the war is reduced to just a backdrop.
Despite a Supreme Court order saying that foreign journalists are allowed to enter the Gaza Strip, permission has still not been given.
They're controlling what we can film and who we can talk to show just their side of the story.
The story the Israelis allowed the media to cover: Palestinian rockets landing in Israel, where 3 civilians were killed. The story Israel denied the media access to: Gaza, where some 1,200 people were killed, more than 300 of them children. Approximately 100 Palestinian children killed for every Israeli civilian killed, and the media were not allowed to go there.
There was definitely an attempt to manipulate, that Israel wanted to paint this picture that that everybody in Gaza is supportive of Hamas, and you have to make a stop to this terrorism. And it was very frustrating that we weren't allowed to get in, and I think it was naive to assume that we would just listen to the Israeli side of the story. We wanted to go in and find out for ourselves.
We felt we've been lied to by people who accuse us of bending the truth and were manipulating coverage of this conflict in an outrageous and disgraceful way. And not only were we barred access, but we also, as I said, moved back to these one or two points. The Hill of Shame, one of them was called, where hundreds of news crews were put.
For 23 days, the only news media in Gaza freely covering the story were the organizations already inside before the Israeli military began its attack. Everyone else was locked out by Israel. Al Jazeera was the only English-language news channel with correspondents there. The Western news presence in Gaza has shrunk, not just due to diminishing news budgets, but also security concerns.
As you can see, I've been dressed in what is an explosive belt.
When BBC correspondent Alan Johnston was kidnapped in 2007, the BBC decided it would no longer station a correspondent there.
We are inside Shifa Hospital.
That meant that on this story, the BBC had to rely on local hires, Palestinian stringers, who suddenly became the faces of news channels in Gaza.
Hundreds of kids, women and children have been brought to this hospital for medical treatment.
There's a very clear pattern of how particularly English-speaking and Western media cover Gaza, and it was really exemplified by these 22 days and their shortcomings in being here.
Gaza is about 2 miles that way.
They based their correspondence in Jerusalem and banked on the fact that in 2 hours they could be in Gaza and can cover the story. This war caught them all out, and this war taught a huge lesson to those organizations that they cannot ignore Gaza any longer.
So I was relying heavily on the information I was getting from WA's agency journalists inside Gaza, some of the most dedicated and bravest people in the business. They did an amazing job getting the information and the pictures out, but I was being relayed that information by producers here in Jerusalem and also in London. So the challenge really was making it accurate, but I think what was missing was a connection.
Unless you look at the face of a child sitting in their home looking outside the window while the Israeli bombs are going off all around them, unless you really get that and you see that, I don't think you can really understand. I mean, everyone here lived this story. There was no green zone, there was no area where journalists were safe but the Palestinians weren't. Everyone was in the same boat, everyone felt like a target.
Obviously the correspondent's job is to make the viewer feel that what is happening, what they're watching from their sofa on TV is happening to real people, that to make that emotional connection and to make people watching at home realise it is real. And I think that's what was missing from a lot of the coverage. I think we did our best, but because the Israelis imposed these draconian controls, something was missing.
Eventually, news networks in North America and Europe began using Al Jazeera correspondents to get first-hand reports.
Ayman Mohyeddin of Al Jazeera is one of the few network TV reporters in Gaza, and he joins us live right now from Gaza City. Mr. Mohyeddin, thanks for joining us.
There was a great added sense of responsibility knowing that as the only international English language broadcaster here, so much of the world was seeing and hearing what we were reporting, and that really gave us a sense of purpose and gave us a sense of responsibility that made us overcome any personal fears, any personal fatigue, any personal reservations that we may have had about doing this story.
So many of your initial reports with us were from the Israeli side of the border because they would not allow reporters in.
The question that networks and newspapers are asking themselves now is, how do they avoid getting locked out again? Should they stop trying to cover the Gaza story from Jerusalem and base correspondents in Gaza? That means making a commitment to the story. It means spending money, and it can be dangerous.
I think the Gaza war highlighted a very important point in how the Western media covers the Gaza crisis.
We've had a siege here for more than a year and a half, and because it hasn't been breaking news, news organizations pretty much ignored it, certainly the big ones.
It was a slow stranglehold on the people here, and so because it was not as visually as exciting and perhaps not as dramatic, they didn't see it as important to be here until there was the military confrontation and the war.
Whether that will be sustained in the long term, I doubt it, and whether they will be caught out again as a result of that decision, probably yes.
Gaza City has really been crippled.
In the coming months, there's no doubt that Gaza will remain somewhat on the radar of media organizations, but by no means do I think that any of the large media organizations are going to change their structure or going to adopt any kind of new coverage plan following what has happened in Gaza.
And if that proves to be true, and there's another war on Gaza, the international media will find themselves at the mercy of their Israeli minders once again. Here's how our Global Village voices see the reporting restrictions on the war on Gaza.
If Israel believes in democracy and calls themselves a democratic nation that believes in freedom of speech, then why did it ban journalists, international journalists, from being present in Gaza? But having said that, images still got out. The world still found out how sickening some of the Israeli attacks were on innocent people.
I do think it was a deliberate policy not to let journalists into Gaza. I think that in doing so, that allowed the Israelis to create the perception that there is a two-sided conflict going on. It made journalists look at the Israeli side of the conflict, when in reality I think it's quite questionable that there really is two sides, and I think the numbers speak for themselves in terms of the asymmetry of the situation.
Our Global Village Voice platform gives all you amateur media critics out there the chance to stop yelling at your television sets and start talking to your webcams. Just email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net and we will find a way to get your comments on what is good or bad about the media on the air. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Still on Gaza, the British Broadcasting Corporation has come under attack for refusing to air an aid appeal for Palestinians there. The publicly funded global broadcaster took the decision not to air a 3-minute video for the victims of the Israeli attack on Gaza, which was produced by the Disasters Emergency Committee. BBC executives defended their decision, saying it was important to maintain what they called impartiality in their coverage of the Middle East. However, in the past, the BBC has shown humanitarian appeals in response to conflicts in Congo and Darfur. The decision not to broadcast the Gaza appeal provoked more than 10,000 complaints, as well as accusations of bias on the Palestine-Israel story, which the BBC denies. President Barack Obama sent some interesting signals in his first formal broadcast interview since taking office, not just on what he said, but on who he said it to. The president sent a message to the Arab and Muslim world saying he was out to engage them, not confront them.
To the broader Muslim world, what we are going to be offering is a hand of friendship.
Mr. Obama chose to deliver that message through Al Arabiya, a pan-Arab channel based in Dubai and owned by Saudis. President Bush's Arabic network of choice tended to be Al Hurra, the U.S. government-funded network which the Bush administration set up and then launched in 2004. French President Nicolas Sarkozy is spending almost $800 million to help the country's ailing newspaper industry by getting young people to read more papers. Monsieur Sarkozy's initiative is to offer every 18-year-old in France a year's free subscription to the paper of their choice to boost their reading habits. The French press has suffered from declining readership and labor problems and is among the least profitable in Europe. Since his election, Sarkozy has taken a hands-on approach to media issues, including putting some of his own people in charge of government-funded television channels. A Dutch appeal court has ruled that MP and self-styled filmmaker Geert Wilders will face trial for his anti-Islamic statements. In a reversal of a previous ruling, Wilders, leader of the Party for Freedom, which he founded, will be prosecuted for likening Islam with Nazism. Wilders has said the judgment was an attack on freedom of expression. However, the judges ruled that Wilders', quote, one-sided generalization, unquote, through various media went beyond his right to freedom of speech, as well as the license normally granted to politicians. Finally, the Vatican has entered the digital age with the launch of its own channel on the video sharing site YouTube. Video and audio of papal speeches like this one will be posted on the site.
The message concerns the new technologies, which have made the internet a resource of utmost importance.
The Vatican hopes to reach a broader, younger audience, from the devout to the curious web surfer, through its new initiative. The channel can be accessed in 4 languages: Italian, English, German, and Spanish. We're back after the break when we ask the spokesperson for the Israeli military why the media were kept out of Gaza.